Thank you so much. We are here for the Clean Buildings Performance Grants Applicants Conference. I'll give a couple more minutes to let folks trickle in. There's quite a bit of interest today, so I want to be sure we have time for everybody to participate as we can. So we'll get started here in just a little bit. Thank you all for your patience.
Derek, while we wait for folks to join, do you mind if I jump in with a request on the Q&A?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So folks, we know that there's going to be lots of questions coming in, and the plan is to capture these questions. We've got a team behind the scenes here that is going to answer a lot of those questions as best as we can and as quick as we can. And then after this webinar, we will capture all those questions and answers and provide them or share them out with the recording, as well as put these on our website as part of the FAQ. So to help us do that, if you would kindly put your questions within the Q&A, which is down at the bottom of your screen. Add your questions there. That makes it a lot easier for our buildings team to answer those questions at that moment, but then also makes it much easier to capture them and transfer those to the website as well. So again, if you can put your questions in the Q&A, that would be fantastic. Perfect.
The Q&A has been turned off by the host.
Gotcha. Thanks, Charles. We will get that corrected then.
How about now? Are we able to do the Q&A now? Is that showing up for folks?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you for the heads up on that.
Is that different than the chat?
Yes, it is different than the chat. There is the chat function. There's also a Q&A. It just allows us to track the questions a little bit better. And so we can be a little bit more intentional with our follow-up after the fact. So if you have any specific questions, those should definitely be directed to the Q&A.
Where is that Q&A located on the screen? I'm having trouble finding it.
It should be down towards the bottom. As the host, I'm not sure if it looks a little bit different for me. But yeah, just down towards the bottom.
You can select the three dots that say more, and then Q&A is one of the options under that.
Thank you.
Found it. Thank you.
Again, if folks are having troubles finding that Q&A, we'd like those questions to go in there. You can go to the three dots that says more and should be able to access the Q&A from that point. Well, I think we should probably go ahead and get started. Thank you all so very much for being here. We're here for the Clean Buildings Performance Grants Pre-Applicants Conference. I'll be going through the RFA itself and the application. Sorry here real quick. And then we'll have some time at the end for question and answer. Want to, excuse me, remind folks that as this is a competitive application, we can't necessarily give guidance as far as what an application should entail. We can speak more to general eligibility of the applicants, general eligibility of a scope of work, but we can't provide specific guidance on an application itself. So just want to put that out there. It can sometimes be frustrating for folks, but as it is a competitive application, we want to ensure that everyone has the same access to information and to support. My name is Derek Cockle. I am the RFA coordinator here for the Clean Buildings Performance Grants. I am part of, sorry, I've got my screens all backwards. Okay. We are here with the Department of Commerce, who provides lots of support throughout the state of Washington. We work with, from small business assistance to planning and tech assistance, economic development. We really have a broad reach here across the state of Washington in providing support and trying to ensure that all residents within the state can thrive and prosper. Our agenda today, we'll be going over the Clean Buildings Performance Grants. We'll be doing an application overview. We'll talk briefly on the evaluation and scoring. We'll make notice of some reference, and then we'll leave some time for questions and comments at the end. Again, if folks could direct their questions to the Q&A, that will help us here on the back end get those answered. We will be posting the responses in a Q&A document, which will be hosted on the Clean Buildings Performance Grants Funding webpage. We're planning to update that document twice a week. So any questions from this pre-applicants conference, any questions that come into the mailbox, those will be answered there in the Q&A document itself. Okay, moving on to the application overview. I took screenshots of the application itself so we wouldn't be scrolling through everything, but want to stick really closely to the application itself. So that's kind of what we will be reviewing. The purpose and background of the Clean Buildings Performance Grants comes from Substitute Senate Bill 5949 as amended by the House in Section 1029. It authorized $25 million for Tier 1 covered buildings as defined in RCW 1927A 200. Commerce has reserved this portion for privately held Tier 1 buildings, including nonprofit organizations pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Additionally, in Gross Substitute Senate Bill 5949, authorized $15,427,000 for public buildings. This portion of the funding is open to local governments, municipalities, ports, hospital districts, public higher education institutions, school districts, federally recognized tribal governments, and state agencies pursuing compliance for Tier 1 or Tier 2 covered buildings. Again, on reminder, for Tier 1 buildings, those are buildings larger than 50,000 square feet. And then for Tier 2 buildings, those are buildings between 20,000 and 50,000 square feet, and multifamily housing buildings larger than 20,000 square feet. Moving into the objectives of the funding, the primary objective of this funding is to support compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, as compliance is going to look different from one building to the next, and the legislation itself was fairly open, not too prescriptive. We wanted to mirror that in the application itself, in the solicitation itself. So we have kind of identified two basic scopes of work to try and provide some guidance for applicants. Those two basic scopes of work relate to building retrofit projects and contracted services projects. The building retrofit projects can include things, but are not limited to heating and cooling upgrades, lighting upgrades, HVAC controls upgrades. There's a lot of different energy efficiency measures that can be implemented to assist a building as it is pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Along those lines, some buildings are not going to need to do energy retrofits in order to comply with the standard. So this is where the contracted service portion comes in to try and pick up some of those needs as well, address some of those needs as well. So these contracted services projects are intended to, but not limited to developing things like an energy management plan, operations and maintenance programs, energy auditing services, where similar programs aren't also available. Commerce has an energy audits for public buildings grant program. So we would expect that those audit applications would go through that grant program before coming through this program. There are also other needs for applicants beyond, specifically developing an energy management plan or an operations and maintenance program, those things that are identified, directly identified, within the Clean Buildings standard in order to comply. So things like accounting support to really try and identify how to come into compliance with the standard. Those types of projects would also be eligible for an application. So again, the legislation itself was not super prescriptive as far as what would be an eligible program, and we tried to mirror that here. Yeah, so funding allocation priorities will include buildings with earlier compliance dates, as well as those who may face penalties without immediate support. Additional priorities will consider the resulting amount of energy saved and ability to finish the project within the period of performance, as well as considerations for geographic equity and then availability of other accelerator supports available to the building owner. Moving into minimum qualifications. These minimum qualifications, license to do business in the state of Washington, and then another minimum qualification, privately owned Tier 1 building pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standards, or a publicly owned Tier 1 or Tier 2 building pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. The applicant must either own the facility proposed for the project or hold a lease that extends beyond the time of the expected life of the proposed project. Those are minimum qualifications for the applicant. Minimum qualifications for the project are that all portions of the proposed project must be directly related to pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Moving into the funding, how it is laid out. We have the amounts that are available for the two kind of cohorts of buildings. The application maximum is $2 million, and there is no minimum application amount. Applicants can include multiple scopes of work in one application, as long as the combined amount in the single application does not exceed $2 million. There are no match requirements with this funding, and the funding cannot be used to supplant or replace funds already committed to a proposed project. Commerce will not fund projects beyond 100% of the total project cost, and similar supports such as accelerators, incentives, or other grant programs that apply to the project, which are offered by local municipalities, utilities, for example, must be considered before those costs can be included in an application. The period of performance we'll get into this next. Period of performance. This is a very quick turnaround on this funding opportunity. the legislation was tied to the November election, so we had to wait until those results became known in order to move forward with this solicitation. So we are on an abridged, somewhat of an abridged timeline. The period of performance of any contracts resulting from this RFA is scheduled to begin upon contract execution and end June 30th, 2025. There was language in the legislation that says pending legislative approval, this funding may be appropriated to extend the contract date, but we have no guarantees that that will happen in the future. And Commerce reserves the option at its sole discretion to extend the contract for 2 additional one-year periods. And again, extensions and or additional funding are not guaranteed. Moving into the estimated timeline of the application, the request for application was issued December 16th. We are at the first applicants conference. We will be holding another applicants conference on January 9th. The question and answer period will run through January 23rd, with answers issued no later than January 23rd. Again, we are estimating to provide responses to questions about twice a week, depending on how many questions are coming in. We'll get the Q&A document updated about twice a week. Applications are due January 30th at 3 p.m. and there will be an initial administrative review to check for responsiveness, and then the evaluation period will run from February 3rd to February 18th. We have built in a little bit of time in there to announce the apparent successful applicants, at which point we will notify apparent successful applicants and unsuccessful applicants. The debriefing conferences will be scheduled from February 26th through March 12th. At that time, we'll also be negotiating contracts, and the earliest date a contract may be signed on this timeline would be March 12th, 2025. Commerce does reserve the right to revise the above schedule. For submission of responses, these will all be electronic responses. Only electronic responses will be accepted, and they must be submitted to the RFA coordinator no later than 3 p.m. Pacific time, January 30th, 2025. And those need to be submitted to the Clean Buildings Performance Grants email address at cbpsgrants@commerce.wa.gov. The response contents, so the contents of the application itself, must include the Exhibit A, which is the certifications and assurances, Exhibit B, which is the application information and application questions, Exhibit C, diverse business inclusion plan, and Exhibit D, the workers' rights certification. So all 4 of those exhibits must be submitted in order for an application to be fully submitted. There's more information in the RFA itself as far as what is entailed in those exhibits. Okay, moving into the evaluation and scoring of the applications. The application questions itself are broken into 2 basic categories. There are compliance questions. How does the project relate to compliance, and then program management questions. We ask for the scope of work. I apologize. The application questions comprise 80% of the score. The compliance portion is 60% of the score, and the program management is weighted at 20% of the score. The scope of work must align with the compliance plan, kind of how it was outlaid in the application questions, must align with the budget and an energy audit if that is incorporated into the project, that has been incorporated into the project, and must demonstrate that the project can be completed within the period of performance. Again, that comprises 10% of the score. And then the budget also comprises 10% of the score, and that will be evaluated for relevance to the project and by any supporting documentation that is available. Again, it's not necessarily how much the project is, but just if it is relevant to the project, if it makes sense to the project itself. Moving into some resources which are available to folks as they are navigating the application, navigating if they would like to apply. We have the Clean Buildings Performance Grants funding webpage where we will be posting the Q&A documents. Jeff, if you could drop that one into the chat, drop that link into the chat. So yes, we have the Clean Buildings Performance Grants funding webpage where folks can access Q&A documents. You can also reach out to cbpsgrants@commerce.wa.gov with specific clean buildings performance grant supports, question and inquiries. As this is this funding is specific to compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Want to be sure that folks who may not be familiar with the standard, may not be familiar if their building applies, or what the standard what compliance may look like for their building if it does apply. For folks who are trying to get a better understanding and a general idea of compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, which is a key piece of these Clean Buildings Performance Grants. We have our Commerce Clean Buildings Performance Standard webpage, which can provide general support and resources around compliance with the standard, but that is not for specific support regarding any application for the Clean Building Performance Grant project. If that is if that's clear for folks, if anybody needs clarity on that kind of delineation, please do feel free to reach out to us. But just again, want to ensure that with grant specific questions or support, that needs to go to the CBPS grants at commerce.wa.gov. If you have general questions about compliance, what that may look like for your building, that can go to our coworkers here at the Clean Buildings Performance team. We will have another pre-application conference January 9th, 2025, which will be very similar to this one, but hopefully we can address any additional questions which may come up. Feel like went through really quickly on that, so would like to jump into questions and answers at this time. I think, Jeff, I'll defer to you if you see any questions in the Q&A, which we may be able to touch on, or if you feel we should open the floor for questions.
Yeah, you bet, Derek. And thank you to all those that are submitting the questions in the Q&A. I know our buildings team is answering as many of them as they can behind the scenes there. So Josette, Dylan, Sam, Annalyn, thank you very much for addressing those questions. So Derek, if you can just remind us again the types of questions that you're not able to cover in this conference.
Yeah, it would be, specific to like how, what do I need to, gosh, I'm sorry. It's so hard to try and describe it. but it would be like specific to an application, like
Okay.
is this how would this project score, or would this be a good project, for me to apply for? Can't necessarily give that type of guidance.
Okay. Great.
As far as if a project is eligible, or would be eligible based on the RFA, like we can give that kind of general guidance and direction.
Okay, great. Well, if I start going down that path of something that you're not able to answer, please feel free to let me know. I'll do my best to monitor that. But one that I believe that we're seeing quite a bit here is if we can speak more to about what kinds of projects would qualify under this grant.
Yeah, I mean, the main qualifier for projects under this grant is its relation to compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. It is fairly open as far as what those specific projects look like. One building may need, to do a large, it may have had an audit and it needs to do a really deep energy retrofit. And there is, one portion of that, of that audit, which this funding could address, like that would be an eligible project because it relates directly to compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, to where as another building, they may have just learned about the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. They may be trying to understand like what their compliance needs are. So they may need to establish like how they could even pay for something like this. So, a consultation, with accounting services, who would help them better understand, what tax incentives are available, what grant programs are available, how an individual building or an individual building owner in their specific circumstance, what avenues could they pursue to fund compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, would be another example. I think one of the things that we have learned with the standards is that compliance is going to look different, from one building to the next. Everybody's going to have different compliance needs. So we're not trying to be too prescriptive as far as what the specific scope of work is, as long as it is directly related to pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard.
Great. And to follow up on that, Derek, aside from the specific types of projects that would qualify or that could be included with the scope of this work, but how does this grant apply when it comes to either completed projects, in progress, or prospective projects?
Yeah, the timeline is really tight and the turnaround is really tight on this. So the ability to perform the scope of work by June 30th of 2025 is going to be key. I, recognize that it's not ideal. That's one of the limitations of this funding. But that is, as far as timelines, yeah, June 30th of 2025. Did that get to the answer? I feel like I missed a portion of what you were trying to ask.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, Derek, is as long as the project is completed by June 2025?
June 30th, 2025 is the period of performance for this funding.
Okay, great. Thanks. And then the last piece of this question that we're seeing in the Q&A is if you can answer how are grant values determined?
I'm not sure if I understand the grant values, what that entails.
Gotcha. And that might be one we have to come back to.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So let's, I'll pin that one and then we'll try to come back to that one.
Okay.
We've got several in here for you. Could receiving this grant require a building to need to submit additional projects if they are compliant through the investment criteria pathway due to improved cost effectiveness and savings to the investment ratio?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll probably have to respond to that one in the
Okay.
Q&A.
Okay, great. And if we're not able to get to these questions or have the answers right offhand, certainly we will be doing some follow-up as well.
Mhm.
Can already completed projects pursue the grant? And if so, what is the cutoff date?
I mean, the project would need to be related to compliance with the standard, and funds could not have been committed to the project itself. We have the period of performance. The timeline for this is, the time of contract execution, which is estimated to be March 12th through June 30th of 2025. On a case-by-case basis, at the time of contract negotiation, Commerce is at times able to negotiate an earlier start date for costs. But that again is on a case-by-case basis at the time of contract negotiation. Yeah.
Okay, right. And so I know we talked about as far as the completion being, the completed date being June 30th, 2025. Now the billing, is that different? Does the billing need, when does the Clean Building Performance Standard need to be billed by to qualify for the grant?
I mean, the June 30th, 2025, like that's when the program ends essentially, and then shortly after that, we will have to have all of the funds in the program expended. So that's the end of the contract period. I couldn't give a specific date, but it would be shortly after 2025.
Okay.
I'm sorry, shortly after June 30th of 2025.
Okay. All right. Derek, we've got someone asking for clarification on section 1.4. Specifically, the clarifications we're looking for clarification on the funding cannot supplement or replace funds already committed to the project. They're asking is that committed by another grant or internally committed within the building owner's budget?
Yeah, I mean, it would be committed in any way, whatsoever. If, as I understand it, if funds have been set aside and identified to pay for a specific portion of a project, then that would cover that as far as I best understand. But we can dig in a little bit more and answer that question a little bit more specifically in the Q&A document.
Okay. Are lighting projects acceptable, and also are smart meter projects acceptable?
As they relate to compliance, yes, they would be. Lighting projects are something which in general bring down energy use, as compliance with the standard, is bringing energy for many buildings is bringing energy use under a certain target, then that a lighting retrofit project would certainly be eligible. Where smart meters come in, I think we'll probably need to answer this more specifically in the Q&A, as there are, yeah, we'll answer that smart meter one more specifically in the Q&A.
Okay. Can a building that is already in compliance with the EUI benchmark still apply if the project will result in significant energy savings?
The application would need to be related to coming into compliance with the standard or pursuing compliance with the standard. So if a building is already in compliance with the standard, then I don't believe that would be an eligible activity.
Okay. And how is geographic equity scored in the application review process?
There are additional points given to geographic equity. So for rural applicants and for those who fall within an overburdened community or vulnerable population on the Office of Financial Management's overburdened community of vulnerable populations map, they are given additional weight in the evaluation itself.
Okay. Let's see. Derek, another question is asking, are buildings pursuing compliance through 1390 able to apply for these grants? How about other campus level benchmarking configurations?
The funding is specific to buildings. Where a building is complying or where a building owner is complying at the campus level, applications, an application would need to be specific to a building and how that relates to compliance with the standard. So it's not prohibited, but it's a little bit different. I think we're working on some responses in the to previous questions in the Q&A, so we'll have a little bit more clear response in the Q&A document on that.
Great, perfect, thank you. So, and again, thank you everyone for including your questions in there. We do have quite a few, so I am going through them as much as we can here, but if there are any that we miss, we will certainly follow up with the Q&A and the follow-up email and then also on the website. So, Derek, what does the securitization process look like on this grant?
I'm not sure. We'll have to answer that in the Q&A.
Okay. And a question asking if you can clarify the criteria for needing to hold a lease that covers the expected life of the project. Is this ASHRAE expected useful life of equipment?
Yeah, it's centered around the useful life of the equipment. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. And then second question, in this regards, asking period of performance. Does this mean the project must be completed by June 30th, 2025? So
the project doesn't explicitly need to be completed by June 30th of 2025, but the deliverables of the project, which would be negotiated at the time of contract negotiations, those must be completed by June 30th of 2025. There are a lot of projects will not be able to finish but portions of projects which this funding could support could be finished. So an overall project would not need to be finished, but a specific portion of a project which this funding could support would need to be finished. That deliverable would need to be met by June 30th of 2025.
Okay. If the grant will be used for contracted services, such as benchmarking, will it be weighed against a school district if they have limited information as requested in the compliance question?
We have tried to build the evaluation itself so that we can score these applications fairly equitably against one another, where one may demonstrate energy savings and one may not be a project related to energy savings. We tried as best we could to establish a scoring criteria which would equitably evaluate those, but also take into account the value of energy savings in projects.
Okay. No, covered that. Let's see. Can we, can these grants be used for private university tier 1 or tier 1? I think that's one question. And then tier 2 and smaller buildings. And there's follow-up question to that. So private university, if I'm understanding this correctly, private university tier 1, and then I believe tier 2 buildings, but obviously probably not smaller than tier 2 buildings, correct?
Privately owned tier 1 buildings are eligible for the funding, and publicly owned tier 1 and tier 2 buildings are eligible for the funding.
Okay. My apologies. Some of them are, they keep coming in, so I'm trying to read as we go here. So the grid resiliency grants that were due in September and awarded as of November 14th were considered to be an aggressive timeline to be completed by prior to June 30th due to manpower issues. Seeing that this is at the end of January, sorry, I'm trying to paraphrase this big long one. I guess when it comes to extension is the basis of it. How soon will you know if this gets rolled over for at least another year?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the budget that comes out of the legislature, and if these funds are reappropriated, without having, a specific answer at this time, the best guidance I could give is to plan on the period of performance being June 30th, 2025. We cannot guarantee anything past that.
And for a tier 2 building with multiple HVAC systems, can the application be limited to less than the total number of systems, or would all systems have to be retrofitted?
No, I mean the scope of the project would be up to the applicant, as long as it is pursuing, as long as that scope of work is pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard in some fashion. What that scope of work looks like is up to the applicant.
Okay. All right. And if a project will not result in the building reaching the EUI target, then would the project be considered a contracted service projects, even if the scope involves a retrofit?
Yeah, that was more the delineation between building retrofit projects and contracted services projects was more just focused on kind of the two types and just the terminology that we set on at the moment. So a building retrofit project could, of course, have contracted services in it. That doesn't mean that those need to be identified as a contracted services type project. It's just the terminology of contracted services is more focused on specific like energy management plan or accounting services, those kinds of things which are more generally contracted, even though I recognize that, building retrofit are also contracted as well.
Okay, great. Are retrofit awards for this grant then only available to buildings who exceed the EUIT?
No. The building retrofit awards are for pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard.
If an organization owns multiple Tier 1 buildings that are eligible, can the organization apply or can the organization apply? I'm going to assume that should be apply as a group, or should each individual building LLC apply?
Probably have to answer that one in the Q&A a little bit more specifically, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I want to group a couple of questions together and in regards to the application and the formatting, asking if there's any guidelines on font sizes, spacing, anything like that, or if there's a limit on the characters in the different fields.
No, there's no limit on, font sizes, fonts that are used, things like that. And I don't believe there are limitations as far as the fields in the document itself. We encourage folks to be as concise as they can in needing to demonstrate need in their application in filling out the application. That being said, if it is something that you don't have the space to submit, you can submit additional pages. But I encourage folks to be as clear and concise as they can.
Okay. All right. Does retro commissioning or continuous commissioning program that reduces the EUI qualify? How does a service like that fit into the period of performance since it's not a project?
Yeah, I would look at it as what is there something that can be done, in relation to your compliance efforts? Is there something that can be done, within the period of performance? It doesn't mean that all of compliance needs to be met, or it doesn't mean that all of compliance needs to be met. It's just that the scope of work that you are applying for support would need to be addressed within that period of performance.
Okay. And so Derek, hoping that you might be able to offer some clarification in regards to housing authorities. This question points out that The RFA says privately owned tier 1 and publicly owned tier 1 and tier 2 buildings are covered. However, housing authorities are publicly owned buildings, but not mentioned in the list. Can you offer some clarification on that?
Yeah, where a building can demonstrate that it is publicly owned, that would qualify as a publicly owned building. I know there are lots of different, just as compliance needs are different from, one building to the next, ownership structures are also different from one building to the next. So where a building needs to demonstrate that it is publicly owned, it can provide that documentation.
Okay, great. Can the project be in progress before March 12th, 2025?
Yes, the project overall can be in progress before March 12th of 2025. The Yes, the project could be in place. We cannot guarantee that project would be supported or any costs incurred before a contract is signed. We cannot guarantee that those would be reimbursed. But in general, a project could be in progress before March 12th of 2025.
Okay. And maybe you can remind us, Derek, when does the period of performance begin? And follow-up question to that is also asking if someone can receive an award for the work that's already been completed.
The period of performance is the date of contract execution, which is estimated to be on or around May 12th, just on the current timeline, and then goes through June 30th of 2025. On a case-by-case basis, eligible expenses, which have already been incurred, can be reimbursed as negotiated at the time of contract negotiation. But we cannot guarantee and do not advise that folks incur any costs and expect them to be reimbursed before contract, that outside of the period of performance.
Okay, great. And just again, as a reminder, kind of in our last few minutes, we've received over 100 questions in the Q&A. So again, thank you very much. Not able to get to all of them right now. A lot of them are very similar. So just rest assured that after the meeting, we will get these onto a Q&A document, also to the web, and then a link will be sent out to everyone on this call so that you have that for your information as well. Usually takes a couple days to get all this together, so bear with us as we capture all this, get everything answered and sent out. So, and that was actually one of the questions that came in. So, Derek, back to you, asking if audits are required to implement building retrofits. What level of audit is required, such as a preliminary report?
Yeah, audits are not required for an application to be submitted, but within the application questions itself, for building retrofit projects, we do ask how that scope of work was determined, and an audit can inform that response and can inform the how that question is answered, and then how that answer is evaluated by the evaluation committee.
Mm-hmm. Great. Can there be a partial award? Can we be awarded a partial award?
I'm not sure. I think we can answer that one in
Okay.
the Q&A. I would think at the time of that could be determined at the time of contract negotiation. I mean, I don't see anything that would say a partial award is not allowable.
For organizations that have never tracked or managed energy use and cost, does the work of creating a tracking system for benchmarking qualify?
If that is in pursuance of compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, that would be an eligible application.
Are are all the costs eligible for developing sorry, back up here. Are are all the costs eligible for developing the O&M plan, energy management plan, capital plan, tenant handbook, and the training for the CBPS compliance? So the cost, I'm trying to paraphrase this. I believe it's asking if the costs associated with developing the O&M, the EMP, the capital plan, the tenant handbook, and the training for the CBPS compliance eligible for this grant funding.
If they are in pursuing compliance in for the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, that is that is the requirement for the funding. I can't say if those are from this point, from this perspective, can't say if those are eligible or not. The eligibility would fall, how does that relate to compliance with the standard? And that it would be up to the applicant to, you know, make that clear in the application itself.
Okay, right. So as a time check there, o'clock time frame, if I can maybe ask this one last question, and then again, just remind folks that all the questions that we did not get a chance to get to, we will definitely get answered and provide in a Q&A document that will get sent out to everyone. So Derek, if we can close on this one question asking if there are any verification requirements to any energy savings claimed in.
So you broke up on me there a little
Sorry.
bit.
Are there any verification requirements to any energy savings claimed in the application?
In the application itself, no, there are not verifications, though this as that is due to compliance with the standard. There will be an ongoing relationship with building owners as they comply with the standard.
Okay, great. Well, I know there's a lot more questions here in the Q&A that we just did not get a chance to get to within our time frame. So, again, assure everyone that we will definitely get to those questions, get them answered, and put on that Q&A document and sent out when that's available. And so, Derek, I will turn this over to you for close this out.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for everyone that has hung on. Again, if we will get responses in the Q&A document, get that posted and sent out to registrants as soon as we can. And if you have any questions outside or would like to seek any additional clarification, please do not hesitate to reach out to cbpsgrants@commerce.wa.gov.